to Talks at Google. My name's Matt Brittin, and today I'm really excited. We have a doctor, an entrepreneur, a magician, and the world's most followed productivity expert. And it's just one person who combines all those roles. He studied medicine at the University of Cambridge, qualified as a doctor in the UK National Health Service. He worked during COVID. He's always been fascinated by productivity, though, and the challenges of juggling everything in life, which I suspect we're all familiar with too. And he launched a YouTube channel in 2017, which has become incredibly popular, sharing his advice and tips. He's got over 7 million followers across platforms around the world, and he's reached hundreds of millions of people with his material. And in December 2023, he published this book, which I read on a plane recently, and I took copious notes, Feel Good Productivity, which quickly became a New York Times and Sunday Times bestseller. And one of my favorite productivity tips is if you're stuck and you've got a big task ahead of you, just get started. So shall we do that? Please welcome Ali Abdaal. Ali. Thank you so much. Welcome. Welcome to Talks at Google.
Thank you.
Have a seat. So, you're now an author.
Yeah.
How does it feel?
It feels really bizarre because it's like I've been a YouTuber for like 7 years, and that was like my prime identity. I mean, well, firstly, my prime identity was being a doctor. And then at some point it shifted. You know, when people would ask, what do you do? I would say, oh, I guess I'm a YouTuber, which is still kind of a weird thing. It's kind of, and now it's like being an author and seeing the book, and you know, the fact that you even read it and took notes is very flattering. It's really, really cool. Everyone should be a YouTuber.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on the book. And I guess what I liked about this is it starts with defining what productivity is, how to do more of what matters to you. That's the subtitle. So let's just start to unpack your whole philosophy here. And for me, anyway, it seems to hinge on that definition. So take us through how we should think about productivity.
Yeah, so I think back in the day, productivity was a lot about kind of output per unit time. Like how many widgets can you crank out in a certain amount of time, and how can you be more efficient? And we sort of landed on this idea of like efficiency being the key thing. But increasingly, as the world's changed, you know, all of us are knowledge workers in various degrees. It's a lot less about just being able to crank out the widgets, and a lot more about making sure you're actually kind of rowing in the right direction. Because you can be very efficient just driving in completely the wrong direction.
Right.
So for me, a big part of productivity is how do we use our time in a way that's intentional, that's effective, and that's actually enjoyable as well.
Right.
And that's kind of what this whole philosophy of feel-good productivity stems from. There's a bunch of really cool research that shows that when you're feeling good about the work that you're doing, when you're experiencing positive emotions, when you're enjoying it, that boosts your creativity, it boosts your productivity, it reduces your stress levels, and it just generally makes your life better. And so the book started off as a bit of an exploration for what would it look like if all of the work that we did actually felt good.
Right.
And turns out there's a bunch of research backing that up, and that's what the book is about.
So I'd love to sort of start to go further into that, and particularly how you sort of get energy for things. So there's obviously things we all love doing, and we could spend all our time doing, whether it's like watching YouTube videos or cooking or whatever. But some of the time in any life, in any job, there's stuff that you maybe don't have energy for. And in some lives and jobs, some of that stuff is quite a lot of the life or job. So how do you address those things?
Yeah, absolutely. So we all have to do things that we don't enjoy some of the time. The question is, how do we get ourselves to actually enjoy how do we get ourselves to enjoy even those things? And there's basically 3 core principles. And there's a story of a guy who I interviewed for the book, and his name is Matthew. And he used to work at McDonald's. He used to work in a McDonald's drive-thru, and he really applied these 3 principles to make working at the McDonald's drive-thru more enjoyable and more energizing. So the first principle is play, and that's the first chapter of the book. How can we approach our work more in the spirit of play? So what Matthew did, he was working in the drive-thru, and he realized it was really boring. He was like, okay, how do I make this feel more like play? So what he would do is that every day he would decide it's a different sauce day that day. So Monday was barbecue sauce day. Different sauce. So Monday's barbecue sauce day, Tuesday is like sweet and sour sauce, Wednesday's curry sauce, whatever. And his mission when he was manning the drive-thru was to upsell the customers on that particular sauce. Specifically that particular sauce. So, you know, they would, place their orders, would you like fries with that, blah, blah, blah. And would you like barbecue sauce with that? Then people are like, that's a bit weird. It's not the script, it's not the SOP, all that stuff. And and then if they said yes, he would upsell them the barbecue sauce and try and get them to buy 2. If they said no, he would try and convince them, the barbecue sauce is really tasty. It's like low calorie as well, blah, blah, blah. And by doing so, he managed to apply this principle of play, added a bit of an arbitrary challenge to his day job. It made the customer's life better because now they had a more interesting interaction. It made his life better because he was having more fun. And it actually improved the profits of the McDonald's franchise place that he was working at. So his manager loved him, and then he ended up getting promoted to manager fairly shortly thereafter. So one of the key principles is play. And a question I like to ask myself a lot, and I actually have this as my phone wallpaper, is whenever I'm struggling with a task, whenever it feels draining, or I'm like doing a freaking tax return or trying to figure out like, how do I kind of connect up the YouTube API to our Google Sheet thing? And it's I'm like, okay. I was like, what would this look like if it were fun? What would this look like if it were fun? If it were fun, I probably wouldn't be on my desk at home in my bedroom hunched over my laptop like this. I'd probably, take my laptop and go down to a local coffee shop. Yeah. I live in Marylebone right now. It's very nice. It's like cafes. And I could just go to a cafe, order a nice latte. Or in the case of you guys, you get free coffee and free food. So you can just go to the cafe and have a free coffee. You don't have to pay for it. What would it look like if it were fun? And that has been a central guiding question to a lot of my thinking on productivity. It's just like, whenever I'm doing something, like how can I find a way to just incorporate that spirit of play a little bit more? So play is one of the 3 energizers.
It's a brilliant thought, actually. And you also talk about things like adopting a character and finding an adventure as other they're quite playful ways of bringing energy to a task. Maybe tell us a bit more about those kind of techniques too.
Yeah,
really fascinating.
So it sounds kind of weird, but one of the classic productivity strategies is, at the start of the day, you decide what is your most important task. What's the one thing that if you just did that one thing today, it would, it would be a win. I started doing this in med school, and I found it very effective. But I realized, instead of calling it a most important task, if I just called it an adventure, it just made it more fun. And so now I have as my kind of my morning journaling prompt. There's an app I use called Day One, and it just gives me like this morning template. And the question is, what's today's adventure going to be? And so today's adventure is doing this talk at Google, which already is fun and just freaking insane, and like I'm super flattered to be here. But that's today's adventure. Tomorrow's adventure is making slides for a course that I'm working on. But framing it as an adventure makes it more fun. In our team, we use OKRs. I suspect you guys might be familiar with that. But but we don't call them objectives and key results. We actually call them quests. It's like, what's the quest for the quarter? Quarterly quests. And there's something about using that terminology. Everyone on the team, it's like, grow YouTube subscriber count to 6.5 million by 2024. It's like, it's kind of a boring way of describing it. The way, for example, our goal was to try and get loads of pre-orders for the book. We called it, we titled that quest Operation Banger. The goal is to get the book to be a banger. Operation Banger. And now the whole team is like oriented around the idea of Operation Banger. It's just more fun. One of our goals for this year is to systemize the whole business. And so we've called it, I think it's like, I think it's called Operation Systemize the Shit Out of Everything. That sort of thing, even just like giving a silly name to an OKR weirdly makes the mind approach it in more of that spirit of fun, more of that spirit of play. And it makes everyone on the team feel good and hopefully be more productive as well. And
you had a great quote actually from a fictional series about medicine, Grey's Anatomy, where you were talking about like, don't be serious, but be sincere. And the character says before quite tough operations, it's a beautiful day to save lives, let's have some fun.
Yeah, it's so true. So a big part of why I applied to med school, because I enjoyed Grey's Anatomy. And I thought this was just going to be like a fictional thing. But actually, when I started assisting in operations in operating theaters and stuff, there's this real sense that the best surgeons are the ones who create an atmosphere of lightness and ease, even in the midst of life and death. So people are often like, well, easy for you to have fun at work, you're a YouTuber, blah, blah, blah. But like, even in life and, thank you, even in life and death situations, there is value in creating an environment of lightness and ease. So the surgeons will play upbeat background music, and they'll crack jokes every now and then. And the scrub nurse and the anesthetist will be wearing a scrub cap that has like rainbows and unicorns on it and stuff, because they've realized actually that when an environment is very serious, people's energy sort of contracts. The juniors feel afraid to say something like, hey man, I think we're operating on the wrong leg. It's like, you wouldn't say that, or like, I think we've just given a drug that they're actually allergic to. Like if it's a very serious environment, juniors don't feel able to say that sort of stuff. And that is how a lot of mistakes happen in surgery.
Yeah.
And so they realized if you make it more chill, lighten the mood a bit, play some music, and get everyone to introduce themselves at the start, the surgeon isn't this like imposing figure. Everyone actually performs better, and you literally save lives because you reduce the incidence of critical errors. So even in life and death situations, we can always approach it with sincerity rather than seriousness. And this is a nice quote from the philosopher Alan Watts, where it's just like, if you approach things very seriously, it's all very heavy. And if you like, imagine playing a board game with someone. No one wants to play with someone who takes it too seriously. It's just like
we've all got those friends.
We've all got those friends.
All relatives. Yeah.
They're a stickler for the rules. They're like, well, you can't technically pass go if you use a community. All of that stuff. But we also don't want to play a game with someone who's just completely half-assed about the whole thing, because that's just boring. It's like we want to play with someone who plays sincerely. It's like they're putting in their all, but they recognize at the end of the day it's just a game. And so, in the process of writing this book, whenever I do something that feels high stakes, and I start to sort of clam up and think imposter syndrome gets in the way, procrastination gets in the way, okay, I try and take a step back and think, am I being too serious about this? How can I just dial down the seriousness and just sort of more lightness and ease, more of a sense of play?
So I didn't have Grey's Anatomy, but I remember a quote from 1970s Doctor Who, and it may have been lifted from somewhere else, which is, I'm serious about what I do, but not about the way I do it. And I like that sort of
that's
attitude
nice.
as well.
That's very nice, yeah.
So I've got a long scarf that I wear when I do stuff. But you mentioned Grey's Anatomy. I did want to go to your personal journey and where the interest in this came from. And in the book, you're quite candid about a few times where you found things really tough. Yeah. It was getting on top of you and you were frustrated. You felt like you should be amazing and you were finding it really difficult. Can you sort of tell us a little bit about where that sort of, what that was like and what that's driven you to do subsequently? Quite often it's the adversity that sort of shapes us. I was interested in that.
Yeah, so when I first started work as a doctor, in theory, med school should prepare you for life as a doctor. In reality, med school does not prepare you for life as a doctor. And so you kind of get thrown in on the deep end. The first Wednesday of August is actually known as Black Wednesday, because it's when you see an increase in death rates, because that is the day that all of the new graduates start working on the wards. And you can see this blip in the stats. So don't go to hospital on the first Wednesday of August, if you can avoid it. That's the changeover day, Black Wednesday. But for the first few months of my life as a doctor, I was like, when you're in med school, going into the hospital, it's kind of optional, right? Going into lectures, it's optional. When you're at university, it's optional. When you start a job, going into work is no longer optional. What the hell? You have to wake up. You have to commute to work. You have to go there. You're there all day. Commute back. And by the time you've eaten and washed yourself, it's time to sleep again and redo the same cycle again and again. And so I was getting quite drained and sort of quite burned out in the first few months. And I would speak to other doctors who were ahead of me in their careers, and they would say, "Oh, it's just part of the grind. Once you achieve N+1 level in the hierarchy, at that next rung, that's when life becomes
tomorrow.
Chills." Yeah. And all of the doctors I spoke to, they all also seemed pretty miserable. But then I kind of realized a weird thing. So there was this one random Christmas Day shift. That was the first time I did a manual evacuation. Anyone know what a manual evacuation is?
Doesn't sound like fun.
A manual evacuation is where you basically put a finger into someone's rectum and you scoop out the poo, because they're very constipated and you've tried giving them laxatives and stuff, but it's so impacted that it's just not going to work. And so, I arrived in the hospital that morning. It was Christmas Day, because I didn't manage to get Christmas Day off. And the nurse says to me, "Hey, I've got a job for you. It's going to be a manual evacuation." And I was, and I said to the nurse, "Can't the nurses do a manual evacuation?" And she was like, "Well, I could, but I'm not, in the UK, the certification laws means that nurses aren't allowed to do it, so doctors have to do it." I was like, "But I've never done it before." And she was like, "That's okay, I can teach you how." I actually also found a video on YouTube that kind of talked about the process. It didn't use real people, it used a mannequin, because otherwise it would get demonetized, I'm sure.
Would violate our terms of service. Yeah.
A real violation.
So that is the very definition of a shitty job. Sorry, that was too obvious.
That was very good. Yeah, so that morning it really was. And it was kind of weird. So it was a very busy day. It was a Christmas day. All my friends were off, but I was working. But weirdly, when I got to the end of the day, when I got back home, I felt weirdly energized. And initially I was a bit sus, because I was was it the manual evacuation that weirdly energized me? and so I was okay, it's just one data point, whatever. And then I kind of kept an eye on this. And for the next few months, I kind of noted when, most of the days I'd get home from work feeling like super, super drained and feeling like, oh, I don't have the energy to edit another video, even because I was trying to build my YouTube channel on the side. But some days I'd get home from work and I'd feel weirdly energized. I was like, what were those days? And weirdly, those days were the weekends. For some reason, when I was working a weekend shift, I felt weirdly energized at the end of the day. Those days were also randomly like Wednesday afternoons. And I realized that the thing on weekends and on Wednesday afternoons is on Wednesday afternoons, the senior doctors are away on training, and so I was kind of on the wards by myself. On a weekend, there's more work to do, there's more emergencies, and there's fewer staff around. So I was there more by myself. And I realized that on the weekends, I was just automatically taking more responsibility for the patients under my care. On a normal weekday shift, I was kind of like, well, I'm the bottom of the rung. Like, I'm the admin monkey. I'm just doing the boring stuff. And that was like the whole narrative that junior doctors kind of say to ourselves. But on weekends, when the consultant would ask, what's Mrs. Jones' potassium level? I would know what it is because no one else, the buck stopped with me. I had to know what the potassium level was. And I found that when I took more ownership, when I took more responsibility for the patients, I was more energized. And it's this weird thing that this sense of energy we get, I think the way we think about energy, it's like, you start the day off with full energy, and then over the work day, your energy depletes, and then you get home from work, and then your family and friends are left with the dregs of your energy. But that's not actually how energy works, right? People who enjoy working out get that sense of you put in the work into working out, but it actually re-energizes you somehow. Yeah. And so similarly, taking more ownership, taking more responsibility at work, yes, you're working harder, but you're also gaining more energy from it. Yeah. And so I realized this on the weekends and started applying it to the weekdays as well, because I realized I could just choose to take responsibility. I didn't have to wait until the weekend shift. And that kind of relates to the second P, the second energizer, which is power. When we feel a sense of power, a sense of empowerment in whatever we're doing, that massively boosts our energy and it boosts our intrinsic motivation.
So play and power and ways of boosting. And I think your self-observation there is really important, isn't it? What is it gives you personally?
Yeah.
Energy. And I guess the other thing you mentioned, the third P, which is people. So tell us a bit about people.
Yeah.
How would you think about energy in that context?
Absolutely. So 3 Ps, play, power, and people. If there's just one thing you take away from this, it's anytime you're struggling with something, just think, how can I incorporate play, power, and people into this? So we've all had that feeling of, there are certain people that you hang out with and you feel very energized after that interaction. Unfortunately, there are also certain people you hang out with, you feel very drained after that interaction. Sometimes those are known as energy vampires. And there was some interesting research I came across when writing that chapter about people, which is that they've done studies in organizations where they do this sort of energy map, and sort of they ask employees to sort of map out who they interact with and who their manager is and who their boss is and stuff, and who is an energizing influence on average and who is a draining influence on average. And they ask hundreds of people this in the company, and you get a very clear map that there are certain people who are profoundly energizing and certain people who are profoundly draining. And then you correlate these energy ratings with the supervisor ratings, the manager ratings, the salary, how often they're likely to get promotions. And you find that the people who are energizing perform way better on all possible metrics. People like them more, people want to work with them more, they get promotions, they get paid more. All of the good things happen when you're an energizing influence. So one takeaway from that is, I like to ask myself, am I being an energizing influence on the people around me, or am I being a draining influence on the people around me? So that's one takeaway. The other takeaway is that generally stuff is just more fun when you do it with people around you, when you can find a way to incorporate people into it. So I realized this in med school, studying for medical school exams where you're having to memorize loads of pointless stuff is not very fun when you're doing it on your own. Yeah. But if you go to the local library, the Emmanuel College Library was where me and my friends would go. I would invite friends from different colleges and we would sit around the same table and we would use the Pomodoro technique together. 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of break, 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of break. And we had a little code name, a code for ourselves that we would knock twice on the table when a POM was going to start, then we would knock once when a POM was going to end, and we'd knock twice after the 5-minute break. And we made a WhatsApp group called the Pomodoro Society, and we're still in touch to this day, 12 years later. POMSOC is what it ended up being shortened as. And I found this when writing the book. It was in the middle of the pandemic. I didn't really have the ability to see friends. But there was this Zoom co-working group called London Writers Salon, where you can just hop on a Zoom call with a few hundred.
We've got a fan here.
We've got a fan of London Writers Salon. A few hundred writers from all around the world. And it's just a 1-hour session. And you do 5 minutes of chit-chat at the start, 50 minutes of work and 5 minutes of conclusion at the end. And it was weirdly energizing. It's like even when I'm on a Zoom call, or a Google Meet call, shall I say, with people from all around the world, virtually, it still feels more fun to do the work. So how can we incorporate more of a sense of people into the work that we're doing?
I think also, as I was reading that, I was reflecting about the role of managers, and I remember this, vividly. When I first became a manager some time ago now, you feel like you've got to be productive by, managing people, having lots of meetings, but actually what you need to do is show up with energy. And it's much better if you've taken a bit of time off or you've worked out and then you're really energized in the next meeting, because that sort of permeates everyone, because we can't always be sort of on all the time. And I think that kind of approach to amplify energy through an organization is something I notice quite a lot as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I try and tell myself whenever I'm on a call with anyone in my team is I need to basically fake being high energy for the first few minutes. Because no one can really tell the difference between like real energy and fake energy. And we can always put it on for at least like a minute or two. But it just starts the meeting off on a really nice way and helps lift everyone's mood. Whereas on days where I forget to do this and I'm like, hey guys, how's it going? And it just sort of drags down the mood of the whole thing and I become a drainer, which is not good.
Yeah, well, fake it to make it is something that's definitely true, isn't it? If you smile, then people will smile just through mirror reflexes, and actually everyone becomes immediately happier.
Yeah,
Who knew?
so good.
It's really cool. So I want to come to audience questions in a minute. I know you've got a number, particularly to get some top tips on quick hacks that people can do. So as you get ready for that, I just wanted to turn to sort of the second section of the book, which I thought was brilliant, which is about all the ways that we are blocked in being productive, all the stuff that gets in the way. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the big issues that people in my audience struggle with, and whenever I talks, is procrastination, right? You've got this important thing that you need to do, and you're just putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, and then like it starts to feel a bit grim, all of that stuff. One way people talk about this is that like if you're struggling with procrastination, then you're just not disciplined enough. But I don't really like this whole like discipline as a narrative. It's a bit too like self-flagellating. It's like, oh, I lack discipline and therefore I'm unable to get this boring thing done. It's like, no, like the thing is boring. We all struggle to do boring things. Whenever we do surveys to our like 5 million plus audience, everyone struggles with procrastination. Everyone here, you guys are high-flying Googlers, but I suspect most people struggle with procrastination. It's not because you have a discipline problem. Usually it's because there's like one or two things that are blocking you from starting the task. So one big realization from the research, and I interviewed a bunch of professors who specialize in studying procrastination, weirdly. And their whole shtick is that procrastination is a problem with getting started. If you can just get started with the task, as you mentioned at the start of the thing, if you can just get started for 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, you're a lot more likely to keep on going. This is like Newton's law of inertia in action. Like if you're at rest, it's a lot easier to stay at rest. But if just with a little bit of motion, it's a lot easier to keep going in motion. So one hack I had on my desk was like a 5-minute hourglass. I just found one off of Amazon, just like a nice blue color because I like the blue color scheme. I just had this 5-minute hourglass, and whenever I'd sit down and I'd be screwing around on YouTube instead of doing the work that I was supposed to be doing, I would just turn the hourglass over and just tell myself, I'm only going to do this for 5 minutes. And before I knew it, like time would have passed, the hourglass would have been long gone, and I've made a start on that task. But often that sort of initial hump, that initial activation energy, that inertia, is the thing that blocks us from getting started on a task. And so the 5-minute rule is a helpful way of getting past that.
So I'm going to go to the first of our questions that have been upvoted here, but then I'd love to invite questions at the mic in the room as well, which builds on that, which is, what is your favorite low-effort, high-impact productivity hack? Something anyone could implement today to see a noticeable boost.
Oh, that's easy. That's the one that I have on my phone. What would this look like if it were fun? And then people are always like, oh, but like not everything can be fun. It's like, okay, fine. Not everything can be fun all the time. But if you ask yourself genuinely, this next thing I'm about to do, how could I just make it 10% more enjoyable? It's a great question. It's like, okay, well, I could put on some background music. I could go to the local cafe. I could just go and sit in the co-working space where my friends are around. I could, I don't know, track my progress so it feels like, I write everything on my to-do list and then I tick things off if I have to do a load of admin because that feels good. I could kind of do a little timer with myself where I set a 15-minute timer and my goal is to try and beat the clock and just get through as much admin in 15 minutes as I can. There's all sorts of creative ways to make anything we do just 10%
And that's
more
interesting because
enjoyable.
none of those things relate to the task itself. They're all related to kind of just making it gamified or whatever around it.
Yeah, exactly. If we're having fun, productivity takes care of itself.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a high impact, very low effort way of just making yourself more productive.
And another question here, this is from Anastasia, that says, what's a common piece of productivity advice that you completely disagree with, and why?
Yeah, I really disagree with all the stuff around discipline. To be more productive, you should be more disciplined. Because, okay, so the way I think of this is that if you imagine a hill, and you imagine like your task is like you're rolling a boulder up the hill. Now, if you're trying to roll a boulder up a hill, and sort of discipline is like you're having to force it each day. It's like it's really high effort. You're having to keep on rolling the boulder and stuff, and like, you listen to some David Goggins and he tells you got to be more disciplined, and you like keep rolling the boulder, and all of this. And then you get the boulder hits the top of the hill, and it just sort of crumbling back down again because you've not enjoyed the task itself. The way I instead try and flip it around is that how do we kind of terraform the hill so that it actually just goes downhill instead? Like how do I just make it feel like the task is downhill rather than uphill? Now, there's always a little dose of discipline you might need to just get started. There's always a little bit of a hump before the hill goes down. But with just a little dose of discipline, with a little dose of discipline and then actually enjoying the process is what makes the hill feel like it's going downhill. Whereas if you're having to use discipline, I think you're just sort of shooting yourself in the foot because you haven't yet found a way to make the process fun or enjoyable. I realized I didn't particularly enjoy working out when I'm there on my own without listening to anything and without like a personal trainer or an exercise class. So I'm having to use discipline every time I'm at the gym. But I realized that, okay, well, if I go to an exercise class, it's more fun. If I get a personal trainer, it's more fun. If I even track my workouts and start feeling like it's more of a game and I've got to make the numbers go up, it feels a bit more fun. If I'm listening to a podcast, it's more fun. If I'm listening to Disney songs, it's more fun. And now I only need discipline to get myself to the gym. I don't need discipline to keep myself at the gym. So I think we should use discipline in very small doses, and relying on discipline is the recipe for burnout.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a great idea. Thank you very much for that. Do come to the microphone. So please, if you come to the mic here, would you mind? And then the other people can hear you. Do come up. Yeah, thank you very much. Then form an orderly queue if you wish. We just got a bunch of people watching remotely as well. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is a follow-up from what you were just talking about now. So you say that discipline is not key, but what happens when motivation runs out? Because at the beginning of a task or a project or a goal, you're super motivated to do something you love, even if it's something that you enjoy doing, but then the motivation goes. So yeah.
Yeah, how do you sustain motivation?
Oh yeah, this is big.
Question.
I agree that discipline is important in small doses. So there's something called the motivation spectrum. I talk about this in the final chapter of the book. In case anyone wants to flick, there's like a little diagram. You guys might be familiar with the idea of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Like intrinsic motivation is when you do a thing because you want to do the thing. We are mostly intrinsically motivated to watch YouTube videos, for example, or watch a movie or play a video game, all that stuff. You're intrinsically motivated. Extrinsic motivation is when you're doing the thing because of the money or to avoid a punishment or because you want to get the grade. You're doing it for an external reason. Now, intrinsic motivation is like the motivation you have at the start of a project. Like, yeah, it's going to be fun. It's like the high energy, all that kind of stuff. But, as you pointed out, intrinsic motivation always disappears. It's not a lasting form of motivation. So what do we do? Now, intrinsic, extrinsic doesn't actually tell the whole story. There are two other forms of motivation here. It's all in the book in case you want to reference, but like there is a form of motivation called introjected motivation, which is the motivation of self-flagellation. And so that is also a bad form of motivation because you're just sort of beating yourself up. And a lot of us, overachievers have the tendency to do that to ourselves. But then there's actually a good form of extrinsic motivation, and that's identified motivation. And identified motivation is when you're like, I might not be enjoying being at the gym right now, but I vibe with the identity of someone who values my health and who values my fitness and who values longevity. And that goal is a goal that I've personally decided for myself is important to me. It's not a goal that anyone else has thrust on me. I have decided to identify with the goal of being a healthy person. And therefore, even though the gym is not fun right now, I'm still going to push through this workout, try and enjoy the process, because I intrinsically value the outcome. So it's like when intrinsic motivation wanes, we want to try and harness this identified motivation.
Yeah.
Sometimes that looks like discipline, where you do have to tell yourself, okay, bro, we just got to do it. But sometimes what it looks like is reminding yourself of the why behind why you're doing the thing. And there's a bunch of research that shows if you just remind yourself of the why, the end goal, like the real result, the value you're trying to get to, it makes it a lot easier to continue doing
That's
stuff.
really powerful. And it's a bit of sort of self-talk, isn't it? I have a thing where I'm pushing myself really hard on a cardio machine, maybe a rowing machine, and I say to myself, you work for me. I'm having my mind talk to my body. Like, don't scream at me that you got to stop. I'm just telling you, you work for me. And I find that actually helps me, bizarrely. Maybe that's just me. But I'm not
actually,
but it's self-talk.
There is actually a study that they've done about this. It was, I think it was on cycling machines.
Yeah.
And they got people to, do cycling machines, and they split the group up into two halves. For one of the groups, they told them to tell themselves, I can't remember what it was, but it was like something neutral. But then for the other group, they told themselves to literally just repeat in their heads, you got this, you can do it, we've got this, we can do it. And they found a measurable improvement in the performance of the group that was just being positive, had positive self-talk.
Yeah.
They called it the positive self-talk intervention, which is like a bit of a mouthful. But just actually telling yourself, like the stories we tell ourselves form a huge part of the reality that we experience and the way we feel motivated and productive. And just being a bit nicer to ourselves often is another fairly, low effort, high impact way to boost our productivity.
Brilliant, thank you. We could go on about this for ages, but there are more questions.
Yeah,
Sir, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Ali, for coming. I guess my question, you've talked a lot about like the aspect of play, and we were talking about motivation as well. What are your thoughts on reward? Like sometimes it could be like, oh, let's go through this workout, or let's do my taxes, and I'll eat ice cream at night, or something like that. So what are your thoughts?
Rewards.
Rewards. Rewards are an interesting one. I think rewards are useful in very small doses, but they can be a double-edged sword. Because if you rely on rewards to get you to do something, you train your brain to be doing it for the sake of extrinsic motivation. This is why, I'm not a parent yet, but I've been reading books about parenting just in preparation, because why not?
That's genuinely productivity.
Yeah, productive parenting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting stuff. It's like if you reward a child with like a cookie or even praise in many ways as a result of doing a thing, they then start to only do the thing if they get the praise, rather than being intrinsically motivated to do the thing. And so, a lot of the research on this says that you should praise kids for effort rather than outcomes, or like effort rather than grades. So I think about this a lot. It's like I don't want to get into the habit of telling myself, oh, if I go to the gym, then I will reward myself with a cookie afterwards or whatever. It's fine some of the time, but like we shouldn't be relying on it, ideally.
Yeah. Thank you. Next question, please.
Thanks a lot, and really like the channel, really like the Pikachu socks as well.
Oh, thank you.
My question is actually quite simple, which is how do you have fun while you're under time pressure? And specifically, I have a big deadline coming up 2 weeks from now. Yeah. It's for my studies. I'm doing part-time studies. And I started doing it because I genuinely enjoy it. I really want to learn this, but I have this deadline, and it's so much pressure right now to get that done. It's hard to still have fun. Yeah. So how do you deal with fun under time pressure?
Nice. That's a great question. So I had this when I came to the deadline for the book, and I said this to my editor. I was like, I've got the deadline. It feels really high pressure, and my editor was like, isn't the title of the book Feel Good Productivity? Isn't your whole shtick to find a way to make it fun? Are you maybe taking this too seriously? And I was like, you're right. I am taking this too seriously. And I realized for me, a book is like a big deal. It's like a book. It gets published. It's got the freaking Penguin logo on it. Penguin is like a real company that my family in Pakistan have heard of. Shit, this is a big deal. And I'm like, oh my goodness, people are going to read the book. Like, what if people don't read the book? People are going to leave reviews on Amazon and on Goodreads, and like, oh my God, so much pressure. And it kind of made, just my editor saying, are you taking this a bit too seriously, made me realize, I am just taking this too seriously. It is just a frickin' book at the end of the day. Who cares? Things are gonna come out, it's gonna be fine, like who cares? Weirdly, I find that lowering the bar and embracing mediocrity is like the way forward. There's a great author called Cal Newport that some of you guys might be familiar with. He wrote a book called Deep Work and recently Slow Productivity, which is a really good book. I interviewed him in my pod, and I was like asking him for writing advice because he's written a bunch of books, and he's like a computer science professor and has all these things that he has to do on deadlines. And he told me a great piece of advice. He said, you know, Ali, whenever I'm working on a book or an assignment or a task or a paper or anything, I tell myself, this one just needs to be reasonable. The next one's going to be good. This one just needs to be reasonable. And so I found for myself, when I shifted the bar from the book needs to be good to this book just needs to be reasonable, it helped me do it. When I make YouTube videos now, it's like, you know, in the early days of being a YouTuber, no one's watching your stuff, no one cares. When you've got 5 million subscribers, suddenly you're like, you know, the views is like potentially 500,000 people are watching this. You start thinking about your view subscriber ratios. You're like, oh my God, like, am I falling off? Am I going to be a has-been? You know, all of this sort of stuff. It's just a lot of pressure. Whereas I have like a mantra that I read to myself before filming a YouTube video, which basically says, I don't care about the performance of this video. I only care that this video could potentially provide value to at least one person. And when I lower the bar of filming a YouTube video or giving a talk to, all this needs to do is just potentially help one person. Not even definitely help, because I can't control that, but even potentially help one person. It just makes it feel way less of a heavy lift. And then I get it done. And then sometimes the video does well. Thank you, YouTube algorithm.
Wow. I think that point, though, about lowering the stakes is so important, isn't it? Because when we're stressed, we know from psychological research that we actually become less capable. Yeah. And it's harder to function. So finding ways to lower the stakes allows you kind of to be more human.
Yeah, embracing mediocrity. I think it's just the way forward.
I'm not sure I like that type.
Yeah.
It's not so motivating to me. I need to work on that. Next question, please.
Hi. I have a bit of a specific question. Do you have any tips for people whose productivity is hindered by context switching? For example, like people that suffer from ADD or other types of...
Yeah, so context switching, and if you suffer from ADD or feel in that mode, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I don't want to pretend to have all the answers here, because I don't think I suffer with ADD or any of this sort of stuff. But there is loads of research that says that context switching is just bad for everyone.
That's chopping and changing between tasks.
Yeah, exactly. You're like doing some emails for 5 minutes, then you're doing this presentation, and then you're hopping on like a Slack message or whatever, and then back to this thing and back to this thing. And there's this idea called attention residue, which is that anytime you switch tasks, part of your brain is still on the previous one. And so like you're using less like brain power on the task you're actually trying to do. There's kind of two things to do here. Number one is if you have control over your calendar, then try and set it up so that you're doing decent chunk blocks of deep work. The way I think of it is like there's only really two types of task. There are kind of focus tasks, and then there are admin tasks. Pretty much everything can fall into those categories. A focus task requires me to sit down and like focus for at least 25 minutes. An admin task requires me to do the thing, probably less than 25 minutes. So all of my admin tasks, I try and batch, stick it in my to-do list, and then I put a calendar block that I call my admin party. Again, just naming it a party makes it feel more fun. Weirdly, I give it a little like on Google Calendar, I give it a little like celebration hat emoji. Yeah. It's admin party. I go to a coffee shop, time myself 45 minutes, bash through my admin, but I try and have uninterrupted blocks of time for deep work. That's nice if you have control over your own calendar. If you don't have control over your own calendar, there's a great strategy from the research, which is that you essentially want to create a ready-to-resume plan. So let's say I am, I don't know, working on a Google slide deck or whatever, and then I'm having to do this 10-minute meeting and then having to go back to the slide deck. Essentially, before switching tasks, I just want to make a plan for when I come back to the task, what am I going to do? And they find that if you just make a 30-second plan for what you intend to do when you resume the task, that reduces the negative effect of this attention residue by an absolutely huge margin. So making a little 30-second plan before switching tasks is, I find, super helpful.
Just while you're on that point, before we go to the next question, I think you mentioned in the book, it's something I'm definitely aware of as well, that sort of the night before plan is often a really helpful thing. So not I'm going to do my steps tomorrow or whatever, but actually I'm going to do them tomorrow between 11 and 12. Or whatever, that makes a huge difference.
Makes a huge difference, yeah. And actually, we've got a question here. What do you see as the best Google product for productivity? Honestly, it's probably Google Calendar. Literally just like putting a block in your calendar for when you do the thing makes you infinitely more likely to do the thing. And occasionally if I'm doing like a Q&A or something and someone asks, oh, I'm really struggling with procrastination on whatever the thing is, I'm like, okay, have you put it in your calendar? And they're like, no. I'm like, do you want to put it in your calendar? And they're like, yeah, I guess so. And I'm like, how about we do it now? Do you want to get out your phone and just put it on your calendar? like, when are we going to do it? And they're like, oh, I guess I could do it today at 4 p.m. or tomorrow at 11. I'm like, great. And do you want us to add me to the calendar invite just so you're going to be a bit of accountability? And they're like, sure. And then they get the thing done. It's just putting a block in the calendar is mind-blowing productivity hack.
I'm totally with you. When my kids were really young, I have kids, I can tell you more than the book can.
Nice.
I was really determined to make sure I took them to school regularly, and I decided the way to do that was put it in my calendar and treat it like the most important external meeting of the week. And it might have to move, but it was always going to happen, and that made a huge difference to me. And now I do that with, they don't care about me now, but now I do that with working out and other things as well. So I'm with you on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, I do it for date nights as well. I do it for times to visit my mum, because if it's not in the calendar, it's not going to get done. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
I absolutely loved the book. As someone with ADHD, I found it really useful, especially the experiments and the idea of experimenting with stuff. What was the most interesting experiment to you, like the one that surprised you the most when you were doing them yourself?
Oh, nice question. So this idea of thinking in experiments is something that's like throughout the book, which is that productivity is a very personal thing. I make videos about productivity and all this sort of stuff, but like I can't really tell you what to do because it's so personal for everyone. But the way that I read all of these self-help books, including my own, is I'm just taking from it a series of experiments. And I'm just going to try an experiment out in my life, and I'm going to see if it works for me. And if it does, great, I have a new strategy. And if it doesn't, that's also fine. Let's move on to the next one. So for me, one of the most surprising things was the unreasonable power of essentially the unreasonable power of a leveling up meter. And so, like, if you're playing video games, I was into World of Warcraft back in the day. Currently playing Horizon Forbidden West on the PS5. It's sick. But like, as you kill the monsters and stuff, you like your experience bar goes up, and then at a certain point you level up, and then you get some new skills, and then experience bar goes down because experience bar goes up. And video game designers are incredibly smart because they really optimize for how do we get people to continue playing these freaking video games. And the level up bar is something that it makes playing video games very addictive because you get this sensation of making progress. And so I found this in a bunch of research papers. I was like, okay, let me try this out. And every day when I was working on the book, I started tracking my word count. So I would track how many words I've written and how many minutes of like focus minutes I was actually focusing on the book. That was interesting because it helped me realize, damn, I'm really not actually working as much as I thought it was. But B, it started to turn it into a bit of a game. And so now something I use an app called Toggle, which is quite good, just to track my time generally. And then it feels kind of fun. It's like when I have 7 minutes here or there, instead of screwing around on YouTube for those 7 minutes, I'll be like, 7 minutes is a good amount of time. I can make progress on this writing thing or on this email that I'm writing or on this slide that I'm working on or whatever the thing is. And I found that tracking my word count with the book was was unreasonably effective in helping me actually stay productive with it.
That's brilliant. And one of the things you write about, and you cover in your videos as well, brilliant, I think, is this idea of being a productivity scientist and always experimenting. Because I often read these kinds of books and you're like, oh my God, there's 73 different frameworks I need to apply, otherwise I'm going to fail. And I think what you do here is you give us permission to just try a couple of things and see what works. And that's, obviously in line with your philosophy, but that idea of constantly experimenting makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and it's a very personal thing for everyone. Like each person has a different productivity systems that work for them. We all have different circumstances. If you have kids, productivity system that works for like me might not work for you. All that sort of stuff. But just thinking in experiments. I think also thinking in experiments. In our team we often use the terminology of experiments as another way of lowering the bar.
Yeah.
Be like, writing a book is just an experiment.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if that bit fails. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the other thing, taking the stress level down.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Next question.
Hi, Ali. Thanks for being here. One of your courses on Skillshare helped me publish my first ever successful YouTube video.
Oh, congratulations.
So thanks.
Very cool.
Thanks for everything. So the question I have is, based on your experience, what is the mistake that corporations are making in terms of getting their employees to be productive?
Oh, that's a great question. So companies. Okay, be careful what you say here. Because one of us is going to get fired.
It's a mistake, corporations. Like, I don't want to pretend to have the answers here because I've never really had a real job. I guess working in the NHS is a real job. Maybe that counts. So if I think back to the NHS, what's a mistake? I think one mistake that I hear from students of mine and stuff who have jobs at corporations is that essentially they're trying to do too many things at once.
Yeah.
This is kind of the whole thesis of Cal Newport's book Slow Productivity, which is really good, which is basically just that reduce the number of things you're actually having to do. Because it's like, if you're working on, let's say you have to get 4 projects done in the next quarter. You could do all 4 in parallel, or you could do them one at a time in series. But the problem is, every time you take on a new project, you have this like communication overhead that gets added per project, or like communicating about the project, organizing a meeting about the project, updating the OKR thing about the project each week, and blah, 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 blah.
Work about work.
Work about work, exactly. And so if you try and do the 4 projects in parallel, you end up having like 3 days a week of your time taken up with updating people about the 4 projects that you have in parallel. Whereas if you just like be like, hang on, say to your manager, you know, bruv, I want to do this one at a time, please. You know, and like sequencing, like series rather than parallel, that massively reduces the communication overhead that's required. And I hear, it applies in our team, we've only got like 20 people, but like still, every time we take on a new project, it just adds enormous communication overheads. So just working on fewer things at a time lets you accomplish more and be more productive. And also people just generally enjoy doing single task focus. That flow state, all of that stuff helps people feel energized.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer. It occurs to me that there are lots of assumptions we make about what's required of us at work that aren't necessarily anything that anybody's ever told you to do. And what if, in your calendar, everybody had by default, admin playtime or whatever you call it, and adventure time. And, actually, if you started from that presumption, rather than I think the temptation is always just to cram it full back to back with stuff. And I think a lot of us saw that in the pandemic, right? That kind of fatigue that came from not being smart about how we were managing our time.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's take another question.
Thanks. Hey, Ali, thanks for coming. My question is kind of burnout related. So sometimes I reach a point where my stress level reduces the quality level of my work. And if I keep going, I can feel quality dropping. So my question is, how do I maintain consistency when I feel that quality level dropping, and also maintain the quality at the same time?
Yeah, this is really hard. I think the solution is to not feel stressed about it. Because the feeling of stress is the thing that causes the burnout and the thing that causes the quality of the thing to drop. And obviously there are going to be times in our life, if we're launching a new product and it's like crunch time and it's like the 48 hours before, acute stress in those moments is like fine. Stress becomes very, very, very bad for your health when it becomes chronic stress, when it becomes stress over a longer period of time. And so, like, how do we deal with stress? It's going to be the basic stuff, taking breaks, recharging every 45 minutes. Walking in nature, weirdly, like being around trees and greenery and stuff, has a measurable effect on people's stress levels. There's this thing called the undoing hypothesis, which is that, they've done studies where they bring people in a room and they tell everyone, you guys are about to give a public speech, to everyone in the audience. And then that spikes everyone's stress levels, and you can measure their like sweat levels and the heart rate and breathing rate and stuff. And then for one of the groups, they show them like a normal movie, and then a movie clip. And then for the other group, they show them a very positive emotion, good vibey movie clip. And they find that the group that's primed to feel positive emotions, their stress levels reduce, and their sweat levels reduce, and the heart rate reduces, and you can actually measure the physiological impact of that sort of feel-good movie clip. And so, how do you manage stress is like a very, very, very broad question. But for me, what I find is when I'm feeling stressed, again, lowering the bar, taking things a little bit less seriously, because at the end of the day, most things are not that deep. Most of us do our work in front of a laptop. We're not in the business of saving lives. And even when people are in the business of saving lives, they also benefit from just trying to lighten the mood just a little bit. So to me, that's the ultimate.
Take a break, take a walk, get outside.
That's the thing.
But you also mentioned burnout, and there's a bit more specific, and I think you've encountered this, you've shared that in your writing and so on as well. So that often takes somebody else to say, hang on a minute, what's going on here? Can you just share a bit on that topic?
Yeah. So whenever I've had periods of burnout or close to burnout, I often haven't recognized them in myself. But it's been friends or family or my mum who's pointed out, be like, hey, you look really tired, you look really down, what's going on? And I'm like, oh shit, yeah, you're right. That's probably about right. And essentially a lot of burnout comes down to sort of feeling like you're having to do a thing, but you don't have the resources, like the time, the energy to do this thing to a high standard. And again, in acute moments, that's fine. But like if it happens over a very long period of time, that becomes a problem. In my case, I'm an entrepreneur, I run my own business. I can simply choose to cut projects from the list. If one of my team members were to come to me and say they're feeling burned out, I would be saying, okay, cool, let's cut some projects from your list for now. We can always do those later, and we can always find a way to reduce the demands on you right now, because actually there's very few things that are really going to move the needle. So let's focus on those things, get them to a high standard.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
I think one thing I've found is that if you feel swamped, sitting down with somebody, anybody actually, and just talking through what's on your list really helps you to sort of figure out where you can drop or delay or deprioritize. And it's one of the things I encourage our teams to do as well. But anyway, thank you very much for that question. We'll take a couple more questions and then we'll be close to the close. Here we go. Thank you.
Hey, Ali.
Hey.
My question is, how do you feel about the weight of responsibility now that you are this kind of like productivity scientist, expert? And do you think this kind of like niche or box that you and the team have kind of placed around you around being this productivity scientist expert is actually like a really good thing?
Ooh, have you constrained yourself now? Is that what you're saying?
Well, slightly.
Yeah.
The productivity lab.
Slightly, yeah. So there's sort of two ways I think about it. Number one is that I never actually think of myself as a productivity expert, even though that's what it says in the book. The publisher decided to put that in rather than me. I also don't, there's a phrase that one of my writing coaches came up with or told to me a few years ago, which is that you don't have to be a guru, you can simply be a guide. And so the way I think of myself is not that I actually know what I'm talking about. It's that like, hey, I'm a fellow traveler along the path, same as everyone else. I enjoy reading books about this stuff and reading papers about it. And here are some things I've discovered that have worked for me. Maybe they'll work for you as well. And so that framing takes a lot of the pressure off me for feeling like I have to be the expert. Coming to here, doing a talk at Google is kind of a big deal, and framed as a productivity expert, it's like, what the hell do I know about like what you guys do? Well, the stuff that you guys do is sick. And like, I don't know how to do anything related to engineering, anything like that. But that's okay, because I'm not here to be a guru. I'm just here to share some experiments that have sort of worked for me and that maybe might work for other people. So that massively helps. I think for me, the other thing is I think of productivity as being a lens rather than a box in some way. So like to me, productivity is just about using your time in a way that's intentional, effective, and enjoyable. And so productivity can apply to relationships. Productivity can apply to health. Productivity can apply to parenting or work, or all of this sort of stuff. So really, productivity is a lens through which I view life, which is how can I use my time better? And I think that's a nice lens that I don't feel particularly constrains me at all.
It's quite a big lens as well.
Yeah.
It's very
fantastic,
broad, encompassing.
Keeps you expansive. Thank you. Okay, we've got two more in the queue for questions. Let's try and take those a little bit more quickly, and we'll end on time. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Ali. Love your YouTube channel, by the way.
Thank you.
So I have a question around attention and how attention is the new currency, so to speak, right? So, but in a world wherein you can't really eliminate all your distractions, like you can mute your notifications or change the apps that you use or whatnot, but how do you increase your attention span so that you can actually work on something for a prolonged period of time? Like, for example, when I'm trying to read a book, but I get distracted by something on my phone, even though it's like a ghost ping or something, right? Like, it's not even buzzing. But how do you increase your attention span when there are so many distractions, not just on the work side, but on your personal side? And I think that lends itself to you doing more focused work. But how do you increase that common, I guess?
See lots of people nodding in response to that. Attention in a world of distraction. How do you do that?
I would recommend Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, about this, which is all about this whole thing. But broadly, I have two thoughts. Number one is basically no one can focus for more than 45 minutes. So if you're trying to focus for more than 45 minutes, you're fighting a losing battle. Not going to happen. So I think that's just useful to say up front, because I meet a lot of people who think that they are defective because they can't focus for 3 hours. Bruv, no one can focus for 3 hours, so don't worry about it. 45 minutes is pretty much the upper limit. One study said 52 minutes, but okay, fine, whatevs. Fine, that kind of thing. So then the question becomes, okay, how do I train my ability to focus for focus for merely 45 minutes? As you said, there's all the common stuff: turning off distractions, turning off notifications, putting your phone in a different room. One of the issues with the whole like TikTokification of like the world is that when you attention switch so frequently between things, you actually atrophy the muscle of focus. And so if I were actively trying to train that muscle, what I would be doing is, if I was reading a book, I would force myself to sit there and just read the book, and I'd have my phone in a different room, so that I can block out any unwelcome distractions. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that not all distractions are created equal. I've heard from parents that, like, when the kid comes knocking on the door to tell you a story, you actually want to stop work so that you can talk to the kid, because the kid's only going to want to hang out with you for a certain period of time. when I was at university and a friend would come, I'd keep my door open so that if a friend walked by, we'd just be able to have a bit of a chit chat. That to me is a welcome distraction. The point of uni is not to get a slightly better grade, but to, the friendships you make along the way. So if it's welcome distractions, embrace the welcome distractions. If they're unwelcome, put the phone in a different room, train the ability to focus, and think of 45 minutes as the absolute upper limit.
Thank you. Great. The final question.
Wow, no pressure.
Yeah, there's no pressure. It's just an experimental question.
It's going to be mediocre anyway.
We're learning together. The answer's going to be mediocre.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's not. It's not. There's no pressure now. Yeah. Say what you like.
Hi, Ali. So thank you so much for the productivity tips. Really love them. I had a question on the earlier point that you mentioned about how there are certain people that you talk to that leave you with a high energy, and then there are certain people that might not be as energetic. And so my question is, what are some characteristics or some traits that you've seen in high energy folks? And the reason that I ask this question is that I also relate with your point on that you only need to be energetic for like 5 minutes at the start of the meeting. And I really use that trick when I'm going up on stage or talking like just before an event, just to say like, hey, how's it going? Stuff like that. And just to create that sort of vibe and energy in an event. But in a meeting, it's more serious. You're talking about serious stuff. You're talking about things like that. So how do you put that energy there?
Nice. Great question. I hope the answer will be not mediocre, actually. Probably so Tintin is one of my team members who's sitting at the front, and Tintin is a very high energy guy, and he doesn't know it, but I sort of study Tintin because I'm like, what does he do that like makes him an energizing presence to like everyone around him? And I've kind of boiled it down to a few things. One of them is a tip that Tintin gave me, which is whenever you're greeting someone, be over enthusiastic in your greeting of that someone. Like, Tintin, oh my goodness, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for coming. It's a bit weird, but like, the other person just really likes it, and it's just really nice. It makes everyone feel good. So enthusiastic greetings are super, super helpful. I think also one thing that I realized through being a YouTuber is that the camera removes 2 to 3 points of energy and charisma. So when I'm on so when I'm speaking to a camera, for example, the camera's like right here. I'm alone in my bedroom, and I'm like, hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ali. I'm a doctor based in Cambridge, and today we're going to talk about blah, 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 blah. It's like, I sound like a freaking lunatic. If someone were to see me, they'd be like, why are you shouting? But it comes across not shouty to the camera because the camera removes 2 to 3 points of energy. So I keep this in mind in Zoom meetings as well, that the camera removes 2 to 3 points of energy. And so one of the things that energizing people do is that they simply speak louder. Anyone can do this. You just speak a little bit louder. And over time, you train your ability to speak a little bit louder, and that generally makes you a way more energizing influence in almost every area of life. And then the third thing that Tintin does is that he's very gracious with compliments. Just like saying something nice to someone. And saying something nice to someone, again, costs you nothing. Even in a serious meeting or a sincere meeting or whatever, is always appreciated. People feel really good about it. I used to really struggle with this to the point, I was about 6 months into dating my now fiance, and she said, you very rarely compliment me. And I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, you almost never say that, I look beautiful or, all this sort of stuff. And I was like, yeah, but I don't want to be weird about it. Like, I don't want to say you look beautiful. Like, that's just like objectifying you, right? And all of this sort of stuff. And she was like, no, I'd really like it if you told me I was beautiful, if you said some nice things to me. And I realized that I was so worried about coming across as insincerely nice that I didn't even hit the baseline of like a nice level of like being nice to someone. So now kind of the way I think about it is, if my goal is to is that if I'm aiming for so nice to the point that people think it's insincere, given my personality, I'll probably get to the baseline. So those three things, speaking louder, enthusiastic greetings, and just saying nice things to people, I think make someone automatically way more energizing.
Well, everybody, can we just say what an amazing talk it's been? And I knew he was going to be brilliant, but he's delivered more than we could ever have expected. He's good looking, he's funny, he's got loads of insights, he's given us the chance to de-stress. Can I ask you to join me in riotous applause for Ali?
Thank you so much.